All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off while people continue to join. Welcome. Thank you so much for attending today's session, and thank you for joining our 2023 Self-Direction Virtual Conference Series. We're delighted that you're able to join us. My name is Molly Morris, and I'm a Vice President at Applied Self-Direction, and I will be moderating today's session, but really I think the speakers today are going to have this well in hand. So before we begin, I want to review just a few housekeeping items. First, your audio and video have been turned off. If you do have any questions or comments, we would love to hear them. Just please feel free to submit using the chat box. We'll address as many of your questions and comments as possible during the session, but with so many attendees, it may not be possible. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website. And live closed captions for the entire conference series is available courtesy of our premier sponsor, Avero. And I am just thrilled to introduce our speakers today. We have Maggie Hoffman, who is a parent, an advocate for self-determination through self-directed services. Susan Platkin is the mother of Ruth, who was born with a rare genetic disorder, Phelan-McDermid syndrome. Susan lives in Suffolk County, Long Island, and is a retired physician. She has been a staunch advocate for school and community inclusion for over 30 years. And currently her major focus is how to make self-directed services sustainable after parents are gone. Kathleen Marafino is the mother of 43-year-old Rick, who has participated in self-direction since 2001. She lives in the Syracuse, New York area. Kathleen has provided support broker services since 2001 to Rick and to others. And she also worked as a fiscal intermediary for 2 area agencies for about 2 years. And Linda Schellenberg is the Director of Community Services at the Center for Family Support. Linda has been a fiscal intermediary and broker in New York for over 20 years, dedicated to supporting individuals and families to receive individualized services. So thank you to our speakers for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to Maggie to get us started.
Slide, please. I'm Maggie Hoffman, and I'm going to talk about my family's life when I was in New York State. Jake, my 35-year-old music-loving anime enthusiast and soulful animal whisperer, lives with me and his dad. Much as I'd like to start my remarks from his affirmative choice to live with self-directed supports, it's essential to trace his health and development, his surprising success. Slide, please. Born extremely premature, Jake's brain hemorrhages and the resulting oxygen deprivation caused a litany of intellectual, developmental, medical, and mental health disabilities. Next slide. School was very difficult as Jake couldn't tolerate transitioning from activity to activity and would signal his distress through challenging behavior, harming himself, classmates, back please. Oh yeah, you're right, terrific. Harming himself, classmates, his aide, and finally his middle school principal. He was suspended or expelled from full inclusion, partial inclusion, and specialized schools. We entered a time period where everything was about modifying Jake instead of modifying the environment. Life was always about tasks and compliance. We never got on to the living part. Eventually, my family had enough. Jake was spending his days in a constant rage against the school machine, learning little and feeling terrible about himself, and we needed a huge shift in how Jake's education team focused on building up his confidence and prioritizing strategies that would fuel his autonomy. Next slide. We built in a period a day to learn self-advocacy. Everything was focused on the positive. Jake had a home class where they developed a tiny snack shack. Jake took great pleasure in being the merchandiser, which meant turning all the Poland Spring bottles so the labels faced the same way. His body vibrated with happiness, topped only by the fact that after cheerleader practice, the girls would come and say, "Hi, Jake, do you have any Skittles?" Life was pretty great. I recognized that we were done with traditional academic classes and negotiated for Jake to find work. Every day after lunch, his one-to-one ed aide morphed into his job coach. He worked stocking CDs and DVDs at a multimedia store. Next slide. In the last year of school, the transition specialist directed me to inquire about different adult services so we could choose where Jake would land. Unlike the entitlement of school, you have to get through eligibility for an IDD waiver, not a problem for us. However, the experience of visiting day programs was truly terrible. I called one well-known provider agency where I described a wish for Jake to have some work experience, time giving back by volunteering in the community, and also time to socialize. The intake coordinator with dripping derision said, "You mothers want everything. Choose. Do you want a vocation day program or a program where he sits in a classroom? Those are your two options." Positive, he must be wrong. I went to visit a progressive day program without walls. I walked in and there were huge stained beige couches where each of the participants were half sitting, half slumped over, eyes glued to a gigantic big screen TV, and I kid you not, Richard Simmons was exercising on the screen. It would be hilarious if it weren't so discordant and sad. At another program for people on the spectrum, I met with an enthusiastic and very knowledgeable woman who began asking pointed questions about Jake's level of functioning and ability to tolerate other people. She presented different hypothetical scenarios, and hearing my answer to 3 of them said, "Don't even apply. Your son would be asked to leave. If he's easily triggered by other people's behavior, he will be one raw nerve before lunchtime." I was grateful for her honesty. I had invited Jake's case manager to talk to parents who were training at a legislative boot camp, and for the first time, I heard about this brand new program called Self-Direction. Luckily, Jake's case manager gave up that role and became Jake's support broker. While waiting for his self-direction waiver to be approved, his behavior specialist identified an environmental center, next slide, where Jake learned how to feed and care for ferrets, bunnies, parrots, and snakes. I decided to privately hire that specialist, and together we wanted to lock down his 2 hours twice a week micro job at the multimedia store and his 1 morning a week at the environmental center to hold us and carry us through into his self-directed services. Not every state offers support brokerage, but I want to give a public service shout out to describe what is so critical about this role in a person's life. We were thrilled to see the back of school because for most of those years, it was such an aversive, inflexible environment. But now we were faced with a blank calendar. When thinking about what do you do all day, we truly had no idea. Next slide. Here, Jake has a job walking our next door neighbor's dogs. I'm going to tell you about a young woman and her support broker. Sherry was one of a panel of young adults talking about what they wanted to be when they left school, and she said she wanted to be an Olympic figure skater. As I heard Sherry talking, it was apparent that she had little technical knowledge of skating. I went up to her support broker and asked, "How does this young woman experience skating?" She laughed and said, "We had to interrogate, what does skating mean? Is it the organ music playing at the rink, or the sequin-covered costumes, or the sound of the blades scraping the ice?" We found that by developing and getting her a job in the skate rental shop, she could connect with skaters and at the end of her shift, take a skating lesson and finish up with a hot cocoa before her mom picked her up. She's happy and feels part of the skating community. Now that's an example of an astonishing support broker. A skilled, experienced broker is aware of a client's triggers, possible safety issues, medical conditions, and mental health challenges. The broker anticipates barriers and builds in strategy. Support brokers teach clients and their families how to recruit and train staff, and then participates in team meetings. Jake is more comfortable with young women supporting him in personal care and the errands involved in activities of daily living, so we would hire young women with energy, flexibility, and a great sense of humor who would encourage Jake to try and brush his teeth, eat his breakfast, shop for his PB&J, and support him to put his clean laundry away. However, next slide. In the afternoon, Jake only wanted to be at work with young men who looked just like him. Black jeans, unwashed hair, and a rebellious spirit, wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with a rock band's logo. Importantly, when Jake was on the job, these guys would not only modify the work, but promote and facilitate Jake's customer service chops. When a customer came in and up to the two of them asking for some obscure rock album, staff knew to turn their gaze to Jake so that Jake could provide the wayfinding. He remembered where every CD was located. We lived in a part of the country where everyone wanted to be a musician, but were still living in their parents' basement. These guys were happy for part-time work, and they were natural social networkers for Jake. In fact, next slide, one of the assistant managers was a bassist in a band. And so in the evening, that same DSP who worked alongside Jake would pick him up and bring him to a dark, filthy pub, make sure to help hoist Jake up onto a bar stool and get him a water, hold the ice, and request a straw. Jake and his staff would sit alongside many of their coworkers, cheering for that manager and singing along in the choruses. In those moments, Jake fully inhabited the man he knew himself to be. That's the beauty of self-direction. It's not a van full of people who go everywhere in a group. He's allowed to be seen as just one more passionate music fan. I want to talk about what successful support looks like. Sometimes I'm a mom, sometimes I'm a tool for mobility or hygiene. I'm a personal representative where I give voice to Jake's desires and needs and communicate it to everyone else. I'm also a social facilitator. These are the different roles that are required of the staff who support Jake. I could model it to staff members throughout the day. When we lived in New York, his staff supported him at home, out and about, and then magically turned him to a job coach. I became aware of Michael Waymeyer's idea of causal agency, that a person doesn't have to speak or have a certain intellect in order to communicate their preferences, interests, and desires. In most consumer-directed services, the client is responsible for literally directing their own services. As part of IDD waivers, the person may choose a personal representative, most often a family member, who gives voice to that person's wishes and takes on the responsibility that is part of the self-directing model. With SD services, we have to be careful about how we talk about choice. Numerous disability scholars have talked about the poverty of experience. How do you know what you want to do if you've experienced so few adventures, friendships, even ideas about preferences? If you've only been given a choice between vanilla and chocolate, how do you know if you'd like peppermint stick? When staff say, well, he's just choosing to watch TV all day, that's wrong in a number of ways. People who feel frozen or anxious or can't call up ideas of what they've enjoyed in the past will often default to a screen. Obviously, we all have bad days, and I'm not talking about whipping people into a frenzy. Next slide. I'm just suggesting that we all need encouragement to explore the wider world in order to figure out what gives us happiness and purpose. Otherwise, self-direction could become its own prison. We lived in the same town I grew up in because Jake had opportunities with school inclusion. He happened to have been in the same fourth grade class as the daughter of the owner of the Haagen-Dazs franchise in town. Jake could belly up to the counter and be asked, hey, Jake, want the usual? Or, Jake, try this new specialty shake. His former classmates were one day going to be future employers, and Jake could be a valued employee and certainly a great customer at their local business. When we moved out of our current state, all of that goodwill evaporated. Instead of being remembered as the sweet kid who used to dress up as a Power Ranger, now he was that odd disabled guy and attempting to find employment, volunteer work, or even a place in a small community organizations has been bleak. Next slide. That's Maine. Here's where an amazing support broker with local knowledge would be essential to his life. Next slide. Jake has been socially isolated in Maine for more than 4 years. Next slide. I am so eager to hear from my 3 friends and former colleagues next to me on Zoom. In my state of Maine, we've just begun using self-direction for people with IDD. Next slide. We look forward to being inspired by the potential for what future lives supported by a full array of self-directed options will offer Jake and thousands of other Mainers. Next is Susan.
Hi, Maggie is always a tough one to follow. My name is Susan Platkin. My 36-year-old daughter, Ruth, has a rare genetic disorder causing her moderate intellectual disability. As a child, she was active, social, and generally went with the flow. Starting in 2nd grade, she was successfully included in regular classes, sharing an aid with another student with modified schoolwork and individualized goals. School was okay, but more importantly, she belonged to a Girl Scout troop and played on regular community basketball and soccer teams. Slide, please. For her, playing soccer was being part of the team running back and forth on the field and occasionally encountering the ball and trying to kick it. This worked because we were able to connect with kind, understanding coaches, able to adapt their expectations, and because the rest of the team followed their lead. But at age 14, over a period of a few months, she developed bipolar mania. She was psychotic at times and almost unrecognizable. She was out of school for a year and a half. She'd be awake all night, screaming and aggressive at times. When speaking about my daughter publicly, I'm usually her greatest cheerleader, focusing on her gifts and achievements. Instead, somewhat reluctantly, I'm going to pull back the curtain on her challenges to show how self-direction for her and others with high support needs is not only appropriate, but the most effective way to deliver services. After she became ill, Ruth was no longer able to be with the people and in the spaces that brought her joy. She had weeks of sitting on the couch all day, watching TV, completely out of it, as we raised drug doses, trying to find the right formula, and she gained 60 pounds. From 18 to 21, she no longer attended school. A creative IEP gave her a few hours a day of home instruction and staff trained to support her while she worked on tasks like shopping and cooking and tried various volunteer jobs. We were creating a bridge to transition her from school into adult services. Slide, please. One of her volunteer jobs was working at a nursery school, helping the teacher read to the children. This was a favorite and therefore one of the more successful jobs. I want to talk about some of the significant challenges Ruth continues to face. Her mood is changeable. She can go at any moment from joyous and happy to negative and irritable, which can lead to screaming and slamming doors. She has very poor judgment. We've worked on looking both ways before you cross a street for 30 years. Still, often she'll just move her head from side to side without registering if it's really safe to cross. At times she can also be impulsive. She's frequently anxious and obsessive, needing reassurance and calming, and she's incontinent at night. Now you have a picture of Ruth's challenges. A typical assessment would no doubt place her in a day program and eventually in a group home. But instead, Ruth is a surprising success. She transitioned directly from school into self-direction, which was a pilot program in our state at that time. 7 years ago, she joyfully moved into an apartment with another young woman who also self-directs. Slide, please. Moving day, you see her new keys clutched in her hand there. 2 years ago, we bought a house for her in her community. It was really important for us to keep Ruth in a town where we had worked so hard to have people know her. Slide 20, so next slide, please. In the house with her roommate and Buttercup, her roommate's guinea pig. So what are Ruth's days like? She does the usual things that everyone does: chores, work, sports, getting together with friends. So what makes it possible for her to have this regular life? Slide, please. We no longer have to fit a square peg into a round hole. Her circle of support makes sure we look for environments where she can be successful. For example, Ruth wanted a job. How did we find one? Teresa, her behavior specialist, thought a job in retail might work for Ruth's love of being around people. As her mom, I could think of 10 reasons why working in a store wouldn't be a fit for her. But with self-direction, I knew that if a job didn't work out, we had the flexibility to keep her same staff and look for another job. So Teresa took Ruth to several stores. She seemed to be most comfortable in Walgreens. We still have no idea why. They developed a carved out job for her, stocking shelves when the delivery truck came in. Slide, please. She's been working there for over 15 years. The job is just 2 hours a week, but for Ruth, it fulfills her identity as a valued worker. People ask her, "Where do you work?" And she proudly says Walgreens. She gets very upset when she can't go to work. There are daily challenges, but in every situation, we try to keep in mind Michael Small's approach, thinking about what's important to her, doing sports, getting together with friends, having control about what she does each day, and what's important for her, keeping her healthy and safe, and being seen as part of her community. But of course, nothing stays the same. Recently, for a few weeks in a row, Ruth didn't want to go to work. This was very unusual, and she wouldn't tell us why. Staff convinced her to go each time, but she wouldn't do her job and had to leave early. So I thought more about it. Food is extremely important to Ruth, as is routine. She was used to having a snack at exactly 3 p.m. every day. Work was 2 to 4. You can see the problem. So I asked her if she didn't want to go to work because she'd miss her snack. Her face lit up and she said yes. The solution, a snack bar and water bottle that she could have in the staff room at 3. Added bonus, opportunity to socialize with other employees. Here's another example of important to and important for. Although she's active, weight is an ongoing issue for Ruth because the drugs she's on put her at high risk for diabetes. Plus, she likes to eat large volumes of food, and we don't want to withhold food from her. Luckily, she likes salads, but was finding them boring. So with the help of Trader Joe's, we introduced her to all the different things you can put in salads: capers, avocado, feta cheese, stuffed grape leaves, artichoke hearts, 2 kinds of olives, dried fruit, chickpeas, and more. Just yesterday, one of Ruth's staff told me that her salad looked like a party. So supplying what's important to her, variety, the fun of shopping frequently, and control over what she eats, and for her, healthy meals. There are so many examples of why the flexibility of self-direction works for her. Slide, please. Ruth is happiest when she's moving. Working out and team sports are essential for her mentally and physically. Because she self-directs, her days don't have to be arranged around fixed staff hours, and she can attend practices when they're scheduled. For example, she runs with her running group most Saturday and Sunday mornings at 8:30 in the morning, but not if the weather's bad. So the morning staff need to be there at either 8 or 9, depending if there's running. And if there's a race and it's farther away, they'll come a little earlier. Next slide, please. Here's one running and second running coming into the finish line. Of course, staff get the same courtesy. If someone needs to start late or leave early, we work hard to make that possible too. To meet Ruth's needs, we keep her schedule flexible whenever possible so plans can change on the spot. Some days she's very irritable and negative. Immediately going out to a park, on a walk, or even to a grocery store can change her day around because her staff can respond to her in the moment. Or if she's very tired, a frequent side effect of her meds, she can take a nap. And she and her roommate use any excuse for a party. Next slide. This last Valentine's Day, they invited a few friends over for dancing and food. If Ruth was placed in a congregate day program or housing instead of using self-direction, I have no doubt that she'd spend her time either sitting in front of a TV or shuffling around in a chemical straitjacket with little of value in her life. What's needed to make this work? As her personal representative, I do most of the admin, scheduling staff, filling out forms, setting up appointments, registering for classes. Her circle of support, which at this point, except for her dad and me, consists only of people who are paid to be in her life, acts, as my friend Maggie terms it, the Imaginarium, helping to create Ruth's best life. How do we find and keep staff? One advantage of self-direction is that you can get people who never think of applying to work in a traditional agency. Neighbors, former teachers, aides, college and graduate students, especially those in teaching or allied health fields, and often people who only want to work a limited number of hours a week. People tend to stay longer and can develop real relationships with Ruth. Ruth's varied staff also widened her life experience. Ruth at the home of one of her staff. Slide, please. How is all this paid for? In New York, people with IDD who live in non-certified housing get a rental subsidy, and her SSI pays the balance. For staffing, in addition to self-direction through the waiver, my daughter and her roommate both use consumer-directed personal assistance to cover some staffing hours, which is paid through state Medicaid, not the waiver. An existential worry for families whose children need constant supervision is what if there's an emergency and no staff members scheduled to work? Ruth currently has 8 regular staff and a few former staff who fill in occasionally. Having so many staff obviously makes the admin complicated, but it has advantages. A very recent example. This Tuesday, one of my daughter's staff had a planned vacation day and Ruth was going to spend the day with me. On Tuesday morning, I tested positive for COVID. Her broker contacted the staff who came to the rescue. One person worked 9 to 12, another worked 12 to 4, and the person scheduled at 5 came an hour early. Also in emergencies, our broker has filled in for staff. So what about people who don't have family to rely on? My daughter's roommate is in that situation. She has 2 brokers who share the responsibility of supporting her. They fill out forms, respond to her frequent texts, drive her to her job if staff don't show up. Are they paid for all the time they spend on her? No. It's an example of what I call the nice person model. It isn't sustainable and can't be brought to scale. But that doesn't mean that self-direction waivers shouldn't pay for these services. Self-direction shouldn't be a privilege for the lucky few. It should be accessible to everyone who chooses it. It's the lack of options for support and backup, not disabilities, that keep people from using self-direction. The next step for our state is to be able to work out how to continue self-directed services for people with high support needs once families are gone, so my daughter and others can age in place the way all of us want to do. And of course, this will permit access to self-direction for people who can't do it on their own and don't have families who can do this work for them. Kathleen, take it away.
Thank you, Susan. I'm just going to introduce my son, Rick, by way of this first slide, which shows the 2 of us riding on his new side-by-side adult trike in the neighborhood. So I really didn't want me in the photo, but that was what we had available. But interestingly enough, we discovered, even though we're riding the bicycle through the neighborhood we've lived in for 33 years, it's amazing how many more community connections we've made just by riding around in this novel mode of transportation. So it serves a purpose in and of itself. I'm going to start talking about self-direction on the next slide, please. The same way I was introduced to it back in the mid to late 80s. I met Tom Nerney and worked with him for a very long time, and that's when I became familiar with these principles. It's old information, but essential. So I really encourage you to read through the slide. These are the critical principles that shape what self-direction should be: the freedom to decide how you want to live your life, the authority to manage a targeted number of dollars that correlates with your needs, the support to organize the resources in your life in ways that are meaningful to each individual, and the responsibility to wisely use the public dollars, and also recognizing the contributions that people can make to their own communities. So that's just background information, but I think it's always critical to keep in mind. To talk a bit about my son, because later on I'll talk about some other individuals I work with, but Rick has Down syndrome, autism, some health issues, and I forgot to put on the slide when I first submitted this that he also has major sensory and motor initiation problems. And I mention those because those are often the drivers of people in more traditional settings, whether it was the educational setting or elsewhere, perceiving him as being non-compliant. And then when compliance is your highest value, that becomes quite a challenge. So throughout his school years, his needs were not met, and he was very frustrated, and I wouldn't begin the litany of behaviors that resulted from that. So if you were always focusing on compliance, not on his individual needs or preferences, and not using proactive positive behavior support strategies, that doomed both Rick and the school personnel to years of failure and having to cope with escalating behaviors that then transferred to home for subsequent years, and caused us to be both frustrated and creative at the same time. Because I had this exposure to self-direction as a concept, as those principles back in the 80s, when Rick was approaching time to leave school in like 1999 or so, I was just determined this would be the we knew what didn't work. We clearly had, 2 decades of experience with that. So it seemed to me that the simple answer, we have to do something other than traditional congregate services, just wasn't going to work. We needed something that offered the flexibility Susan's talked about, the individualization, and those are just essential. And I went back to Mark Gold, and because I've been around so long, I keep going back decades, but back in the 70s, his try another way approach still speaks to me. The behaviors that our children show are a reflection of our incompetencies, not theirs. Certainly we learn that as parents. We learn that every day. We don't start with all the answers, and we still don't have all the answers. And sometimes we learn it from someone new in his life. I'm just starting with it. We're just introducing a new staff person to Rick now. And I have no doubt that Rick and I will both learn from him, because he'll have a style and a strategy that's different from what I've thought of. I've already talked a bit on the next slide. Rick's life can be divided into 3 segments. We've talked about the educational one. I don't like to, it was so traumatic that I don't like to focus or perseverate on that one, but I've identified in this slide what it is that was lacking and that caused that. I mean, every time I introduce the concept of choice, giving him a choice, I even beg them to give him meaningless choices, like, give him 2 choices, what you want him to do and something unappealing. But I never was able to really fully sell that concept. So he really didn't have that. But in self-direction, we find and train our own support staff, and we're looking for people who will presume that there's a competent human being that they're interacting with, that will show him respect, support him in making choices, and then following through on what preferences he expresses. And I don't even remember if I already said this or not, but Rick is nonverbal. So his method of communicating is through supported typing and pointing. And so we use a variety of augmentative and alternative communication strategies and devices. But that's, one has to be patient to do that. I mean, no one would ever choose to have to use those methods of communication if you were able to express yourself easily and clearly to others to begin with. But it does require patience on the listener's part as well. So we train staff, we try to make it reciprocal learning, because that often is valuable to all of us, and we try to function as a collaborative team. And a lot of it is trial and errors. But in his 22 years as a self-direction participant, Rick has never had a significant behavior issue. And there's absolutely no exaggeration in that statement. And it's because the strategies, the quality of interaction went night and day, 180 degrees from what he previously experienced. Rick still lives at home with me. He leads a very fulfilling life. It's based upon his needs and choices. He has pursued interests and developed skills that we didn't even know he had. I mean, I can remember early on in self-direction, I said, well, once when Rick was in the hospital, Children's Hospital, having open heart surgery, so he was there for a bit of a stay, he had some interaction with an art therapist. So let's just see what that does. I mean, art has become a huge interest of his. He's had his work exhibited. He's had his work chosen to be on the cover of programs and the best part of that experience was that it was chosen and they didn't even know that he was a person who had a label, and they still don't know it to this day. So that's the success part of that story. He's created his own network of natural supports, whether it's at the gym with a personal trainer, in the community, in the art world, and all of his activities. The slide that we're looking at now shows just one piece of his artwork, but it's there largely because I want to show his communication strategy, which is just below that. So he typed to his art teacher, the colors are good, that we need to build up the lines. Yes, more blue too. She fortunately is competent at supporting him with his typing. The picture of him with the mask on, well, there's more than one with the mask, and one is at a local art gallery. And to the right of that is Rick and one of his friends just swimming in our pool. And we captured that because it was the last day of the season in 2022 before we closed the pool. And the two of them love nothing better than to see each other and spend a lot of time in the pool. The photo on the right is Rick working with his personal trainer that he's worked with for a couple of years. And that reminds me, I mean, this young man is incredibly good. I don't know how I certainly can't say this as a parent that I naturally brought these skills to the table. I was a teacher, but that didn't necessarily equip me. But it's just amazing how creative this young man is, and trying strategies with Rick and teaching him to use new equipment and learn new skills. And Rick is an eager learner in return. And then the next slide, please. I have this here. It's the photo doesn't necessarily match what's there, but he's on the right. It's just a picture. Rick has participated for many years in a communication group folks who are all supported typers, and that group has been led by his staff person, who happens to also be his aunt at the moment. And they were celebrating, they always celebrate everybody's birthday. So this was a birthday photo, but it's just it hits him in another context with another group of friends. So now I'm going to switch gears, and I do invite Susan, Maggie, anyone to tell me when my time is up. My work as a broker, I serve people with a very broad range of needs and circumstances. The ages range from 12 to 67. Some live independently, some live with family. Many of them are nonverbal and use augmentative communication. Many of them happen to have autism. One worked full-time for many years as a dishwasher. Another one, who really is quite unique in terms of my case, though, currently works as a licensed clinical social worker. But most have never engaged in any paid work. But each person is a unique individual, and none of them would ever consider a choice. Some have had traditional services in the past, some have not, but none of them would ever make a choice other than self-directed services. And I've been many of them, they're brokers for a long period of time. So on the next slide, please. For Rick and others, what is a good life? To me, it's that all human beings, all of us, benefit from supports that are addressed our unique needs and interests, and that are provided in a way that's respectful of the person. So, I mean, the common elements that in all of the cases that I have is that their services are based on genuine person-centered planning. It is not a one-time event. You do it initially, and then it's an ongoing process. They have engagement with lots of other people. Some have family, most do, but some have very limited family contacts, their friends, their community, and there's real choice in what they do with their lives. And going back to what Maggie said, choice is not, it's not the starting point. You have to do a lot of exploration with some people who've not had many experiences or opportunities to even recognize that that's a choice that they want to express. And tons of trial and error, which one has to be careful not to equate with failure, and also look for ways for them to be contributing members of their community. I think we've covered the others. The good life looks like what addresses their needs and preferences, as is also attentive to their health and safety. In my broker role, I want to talk a little bit about that on the next slide. I don't know about other states, but certainly I think one of the pitfalls is that it's certainly in terms of qualifications, and I'm not a big person on credentials. I think more to your personality and your values, but it's treated as an entry-level job here, which sometimes makes it a bit challenging. But to me, the biggest part of brokerage is actually teaching. You're teaching the individual, the circle of support, what are their choices? What can they do? What are the possibilities out there? And helping them research those and generate new opportunities. And I bother to say that it's not simply budget writing, only because I've seen examples where people are taught to be brokers with that as their sole responsibility. It reminds me of the old IEP, where people would talk about placement first instead of last. The budget writing is the last piece after you've done all of this extensive person-centered planning and gotten to know the person. Sometimes you have to create resources, networks that don't exist. You're always offering new ideas and menus of choices and connecting them to other people. And then there's just a little quote to the right, which is also from the Center for Self-Determination, about what a person's budget should be doing for them. Enhanced brokerage, I've gotten involved in that, and on the next slide. And I think it's just a simple definition. You're just being responsive to people's needs. As I have stated at the bottom of that slide, I never chose or decided to be an enhanced broker. It happened because the individual participants' needs took me there. And honestly, sometimes it's quite overwhelming, but if you're working with a person and you stay with them over time, that's probably going to be a natural transition due to the kinds of reasons listed here. I mean, it could be the age or health of the participant. It could be a change in their living circumstance or loss of a parent. And so in the case where I really do totally enhanced brokerage, I mean, I handle all the staffing needs, the recruiting, hiring, training, monitoring. And sometimes you pick up care manager duties too, not because you want to, but because something needs to be done. I do want to touch upon briefly, and again, anyone else, feel free to tell me. I think I have a few more minutes. Aging in place with continued supports. We need as a society and as a service system to look for ways to enable people to age in place. And I hope that I am one of those people, as well as my son. I have that same goal. We want everyone to be as independent as possible for as long as possible, but there are no easy answers as to how to do this. Other than, and again, Susan alluded to this, to expand self-direction to address that goal is, I mean, it would, you know, it would cost more, but it certainly would cost less than institutional care, and it can be personalized. So we need to be creative. We need to keep focusing on that as a goal. But I also know as an older parent that timing is everything, and then we don't have a predetermined plan now in our own family, and with that comes some risk. But I'm not willing to let my son or force my son to give up what he has and what is important to him. I'm working on a plan, but I don't have it at the moment. So I'm just giving you some quick examples of some work in progress, just to give you a sense of the range of needs within my caseload. Rick, we've talked about already. I'll give an example of Don, who does live independently, but at age 67, he's acquired some new health issues. He has reduced support from his mother, who's in her 90s, and due to her own age and infirmity, can't help. She has a very contentious family dynamics. But what we're working on is trying to hold together his team right now, bring in as many supports as possible to keep him in his current living situation, because really his next most likely choice is a nursing home. Okay. Maggie gave me the cue. I think the others you can read through if anyone has any questions about those folks. I just want to make my closing comment that self-directed services themselves are a work in progress. It's worth our effort. And one little tiny comment, I know that our title is that surprising success stories. My strong belief is that it shouldn't be surprising. It may be if you haven't experienced, but it shouldn't be surprising that self-directed services are successful, no matter what the person's level of need. And I'm going to end with one more quote, and this is from Judy Heumann, and I had the privilege of working and knowing her back in the day too. But independent living is not doing things by yourself. It is being in control of how things are done and what one does. So thank you all.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's amazing to hear the stories of Rick and Jake and Ruth and their super moms that continue to be an active voice in the movement of self-direction and self-determination. Next slide, please. My name is Linda Schellenberg, and I wanted to just start by sharing Benji with you. So I have just a short video, which get your tissues out, because it really, for me, really takes me back to see Benji and his life as a result of and part of self-direction.
Second, 2022, in honor of Soul Name 22. Get it? Tuesday. And Washington's birthday, and a week before Mardi Gras, which is a Jazz Guild holiday. My name is Ben, and I am at a very important time in my life. I just turned 30, and I'm about to graduate college with a degree in chemistry. I've worked very hard and have overcome many obstacles to get where I am. For a long time, I've been preoccupied with certain obsessions that sometimes take control of my mind. And what I'm trying to do now is focus on my own story. I am a lucky man. I wake up every morning, I eat breakfast, and I have my coffee. I learn a new language. I play beautiful music. I explore new cultures. I draw. I sing songs. I take walks and explore the city. I like to play video games, read books, and meet new people. These people help me with my studies and my hobbies. Chemistry has always fascinated me because it gives me an explanation of how the world works. The world is made up of atoms. Colors are formed by the absorption of certain wavelengths of light, allowing the colors to come through. Snow is formed in clouds by the crystallization of ice below freezing, otherwise rain forms. My clay is oil-based, so it does not dry up like water-based clay. I play with it because it comes to me, and I can mold it and create it in the way I want it to be. I like to draw street maps of New York City and portraits because they are interesting. I can learn a lot from the details of a map and the expressions on faces. I play music because there are There are many songs that I can learn. String instruments like the guitar and violin are beautiful because they help me elevate my mood and motivation. Cooking for myself helps me live independently and teaches me to be organized and disciplined. I have a curious mind. I read and draw to soothe my curiosity, but I learn the most from the people around me. People that care for me come from all over. They've come together to bring out the best in me. They see the potential in me that sometimes I don't see in myself. Things aren't easy for me. I struggle with things few people can understand. I love my parents. They took good care of me. They helped me with my work and my programs. They are patient with me, but sometimes things get hard. During those times, I want to tell them how much I care for them, and that like me, they aren't alone. With the help of the people around me, I'm able to play beautiful music, cook delicious meals, learn new languages, experience new cultures, and become a better person. They are all part of a story, and that story is mine.
Okay, thank you. You can pause it here. Awesome. So this is Benji. And, as you can see, Benji lives in New York City, riding the subway. I met Benji some years back. He was living in a residential school, and his parents were trying to figure out next steps for him. And at that point, looking at the residential options, Benji just did not fit and would not be able to have the life he has today if he went that route. So here is someone who typically would not be as successful in a congregate setting. For him to have this beautiful life that you see here, his primary driver is his mom. She has to spend countless hours interviewing direct support professionals to find the right match. And for her, as you could see, the right match is someone who is going to pour love onto her son. She has found that artists really get him, but what that means a very difficult time with scheduling and consistency. She's seeking to hire staff who will have a long and enduring relationship with Benji. And this could be intensely hard and intentional work, but she wouldn't have it any other way. So self-direction for Benji and for others with more complex needs requires a highly involved circle and a support broker, as Kathleen talked about, who is a technical expert to help to ensure that the funds can be utilized as flexibly as possible. And in addition to that, a fiscal intermediary, or an FMS in some states, that is supportive of innovative and creative ways to utilize the flexible funding. Here in New York, we have the benefit of a variety of creative ways to use self-direction. This includes funding for community-based classes, subsidies for shared living, state funding for a housing subsidy, as well as other goods and services. Benji has a live-in caregiver who you saw in the film hugging him. In exchange for his live-in caregiver living there with free room and board, he provides support and companionship to Benji and is there in the event of an emergency at night. To help address Benji's anxiety and explore his interests and passions, there's funding for yoga, violin, Italian language classes, and all of this has helped Benji to have a colorful and meaningful life. At this time, we're addressing the challenges of how to sustain this when the time comes that Benji's family would not be able to manage all that is entailed. And both, the prior speakers spoke to this, that we are constantly hearing feedback from families and individuals of this need for an enhanced broker role or a personal assistant or a technical expert who can provide the on-the-ground support that is needed in the absence of a very involved circle. We hear and see the benefit of maintaining the natural supports as they are natural and beneficial relationships, and they need to be nurtured as such. but we also need to acknowledge all of the many unpaid and unfunded tasks that parents and others take on with their adult children, which can be stressful, burdensome, and taxing. In our system in New York and possibly all over the country, it appears that self-direction is truly self-directed. And the opposite of that is agency provided or managed. To help sustain the creative and meaningful lives of Rick and Jake and Ruth and Benji and all of the others, there needs to be something in the middle. And we envision this as an enhanced broker role, maybe provided by independent contractors or provider agencies. So we do see something that we want to keep pushing the system to do more and more. If you could pull the slides back up. Okay, so I just want to talk about best practices to supporting individuals with more complex needs. So in working on this session together, we had a lot of really great conversations. And so some of the themes that we want you to take away would be to be at the table. So you could hear the powerful parents on this session. They have been at the table. In New York, there's a strong and dedicated group of parents and self-advocates, and it's ever growing. They make sure they are at that table, voicing their concerns, sharing their stories of both success and challenges, and always pushing to see what we can do better and what we could do next. So if you're in a state that doesn't have the flexible services that we've mentioned, push your state to look at how you can expand the waiver, because it is possible. Have technical experts. So have experts in place to help maximize the supports and services available. And that would be both paid and unpaid. And these experts need to share the vision and be creative and innovative thinking. I love the term Imaginarium that Maggie coined. This would include support brokers, fiscal intermediaries, or FMS, care managers, case managers. Have a more involved FMS or FI if possible, or if not, if you are working at an FMS company, try to offer and be more than just the quote bank. Try to provide to individuals and family support groups, self-advocacy groups, individuals and family trainings, helping to share staff resources. These are the kinds of things that would be needed to help support somebody who has more complex needs. Have an involved circle. So this would include members that can address the various needs and have both skill and commitment to the plan. There needs to be a strong and evolving circle. This is a key part of this model. And use true person-centered planning. I absolutely love what when Susan talked about the important two and important four. Embed person-centered planning to constantly be discovering and evaluating what's working and not working. Check out tools like a simple one-page profile that can be extremely powerful but easy to use. Next slide, please. So as we wrap up our session, we want to leave you with some thoughts on what can be done for tomorrow. And of course, we're talking to a broad national audience here. And so in some states, you might need to be really working more aggressively on change. And in other states, it might be fine tuning or thinking what can be next. What we want to leave you with is don't overregulate. And we want this message to also be an advocacy message to our government partners, is for this to work for people with more complex needs, there needs to be flexibility and elasticity in the regulations. States should see creative ways to utilize and apply the HCBS waiver. If states want to expand the scope of self-direction to include individuals with more complex needs, they have to give room for providers, individuals, and families to take risk. It's the only way. Have a dedicated mission and commitment to true self-direction. If you're working from working at an organization and really want to push this, it's okay. You can always do agency transformation. At the agency I work with, we had to go through this process, and it's very powerful and can happen. The third one is to create and advocate for new models of sustainability. And we have been weaving this through our talk with you today on what we see as the future and sort of the missing link on how to sustain this. Recognize the issues of sustainability. This is a real issue that needs to be addressed. continue to push the envelope to create different ways to support self-direction for all. Push for creation of an enhanced broker role or a personal representative. We don't, whatever the name is, it's a way in which people who don't have a conflict of interest can help support individuals when their natural supports are not available. And continue to offer a flexible menu of options. And we gave some examples of how the system is flexible in New York. And the last point is leadership from government. So continue the national conversation and continue to advocate for robust and flexible self-directed services for all. The next slide. So here's our contact information. If you would like to continue the conversation on issues of sustainability, please feel free to contact any one of us. And I think from Kathleen's slide where she put the statement that the self-direction and self-determination is worth our ongoing efforts and advocacy, I hope today we left you with that feeling that it is possible, and it is absolutely an amazing outcome when self-direction really works. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes if there were any questions from the chat, or if any of my other fellow panelists want to say a few words.
I'll just chime in to say thank you for just the most incredible presentation. I know we've been seeing the comments streaming in if people are really finding this to be incredibly valuable. You've just brought to life the beating heart of self-direction. I do want to address some questions that have come up about slides, and a recording will be available after this session. There are also closed captions, so there's transcription available as well. Here's a question for Linda. A new model for sustainability. In Pennsylvania, we have both support brokers and housing counselors as waiver services. So there are paid people to help plan for sustainability on an individual basis.
Yes, I think we have something similar in New York where we have support brokers. So I absolutely, what we're looking for is, a kind of an addition to that, like to this enhanced broker role. And I love the idea of a housing counselor as a waiver service provider. So these are all really good ideas for folks that don't have those options in their states. Thank you.
Wonderful. I just see another comment coming in. I have a very close friend that has a son that is 18 years old and wants information on how to get these services for him to use self-direction. I can just note that appliedselfdirection.com on our website, we have a program map. I'm not sure where this person lives, but you can see where some of, self-direction is available in every state. The populations that are served, it varies. I also just do want to encourage people to reach out based on the emails on the screen, looking for resources related to that. I'm seeing a lot of comments just saying, incredibly well done, fantastic, thank you. I think this has been just an excellent discussion. I'm not seeing any new questions come in, so I'll leave it to the speakers if you have any final thoughts, but on behalf of ASD, I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming to join us. We will raise everything up if we make sure that everybody has the full inclusion in the self-direction model.
Couldn't say it better. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today and being part of this discussion. And we look forward to more conversations along this vein in the future. Thank you so much, everybody.